In the heart of a bustling metropolis, Clara Morgan sat in her expansive penthouse, a place where luxury seemed to stretch endlessly. The city skyline sparkled before her, but the weight pressing on her chest dulled its beauty. At just 29, Clara was the heiress to the Morgan Empire, a corporate powerhouse her late father, Daniel Morgan, had built from the ground up. On the surface, she was the picture of privilege and success, but beneath the glossy veneer lay a young woman burdened with an unsettling truth. 6 months had passed since her father's sudden and tragic death in a car accident, leaving Clara at the helm of a vast business empire. Daniel had been a man of vision, known not just for his shrewd business acumen, but also for his unyielding integrity. Employees revered him as a leader who cared as much for their well-being as for the company's profits. Yet, as Clara took the reins, she began noticing cracks in the foundation of what her father had so carefully constructed. The financial reports on her desk appeared flawless, but small, unexplainable discrepancies caught her eye. Meetings with senior executives, many of whom had been her father's trusted allies, were becoming tense and opaque. Clara felt like an outsider in her own company, her questions met with vague reassurances and forced smiles. Worse still, whispers of discontent among lower-level employees began to reach her ears. What had once been a thriving ecosystem of loyalty and mutual respect now felt like a fractured, disjointed machine. As Clara gazed out at the city that her family's empire had helped shape, a single thought haunted her. What if my father's legacy was being dismantled piece by piece, right under my nose? Determined to uncover the truth, Clara realized she could no longer rely on the polished reports and surface-level answers she was being fed. If she wanted to understand the rot spreading through her company, she would need to step outside the gilded cage of her position. But how? Could she risk tarnishing her family's name in the pursuit of answers? And, most importantly, was she prepared to confront the truth that might emerge? This story isn't just about the struggles of a young woman grappling with her inheritance. It's a journey into the shadows of power, deceit, and betrayal. A tale of uncovering hidden truths and fighting to restore a legacy. Stay tuned as Clara dives headfirst into a world of deception, danger, and discovery. And if you're as intrigued as we are by the twists and turns of stories like this, don't miss out. Be sure to follow along for the next chapter of this thrilling journey. The uneasy silence of Clara Morgan's penthouse was replaced by the rustling of papers and the soft hum of her laptop as she pored over her father's files late into the night. Each financial report seemed like a puzzle missing its vital pieces. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something far larger than minor accounting errors was at play. Frustrated and restless, she recalled the countless lessons her father had imparted over the years. To truly understand a problem, Clara, you must see it from every angle, especially the ones others don't want you to see. That was when the idea struck her. If the answers weren't coming to her, she would have to go to them, incognito. Clara knew that her name and position afforded her power, but they also came with a shield that separated her from the reality of her company. She needed to remove that shield. The decision wasn't made lightly. Clara spent the next few weeks preparing for what would be her most daring move yet. She dyed her sleek blonde hair a warm chestnut brown, swapped her designer wardrobe for inexpensive blouses and pencil skirts, and studied how to imitate a regional accent that would mask her refined diction. She created a fake identity, Clara Morgan, an ordinary woman in search of her first real job as a secretary. Practicing in front of the mirror, Clara rehearsed everything. How to appear timid, how to stammer nervously during an interview, and even how to suppress her natural confidence. By the time she was ready, the poised and polished Clara Morgan had vanished, replaced by someone who could slip into the shadows unnoticed. On the morning of her interview, she arrived at the imposing Morgan Enterprises headquarters with a blend of nervousness and determination. Standing in front of the very building that bore her family's name, she felt a pang of irony. Would they recognize me? She wondered. But the indifferent looks from the security guards and passing executives reassured her that her disguise was working. Inside, she met Linda Roberts, the human resources director, a woman Clara had known since childhood. Linda, once warm and familiar, now seemed cold and calculating, barely glancing at Clara's fabricated resume before delivering a curt dismissal of her qualifications. I'm afraid we don't typically hire inexperienced candidates for positions in the main office, Linda said with a forced smile. Clara responded as Sarah, her voice trembling with practiced nervousness. I may not have experience, but I'm hardworking and eager to learn. I won't let you down. After a long, scrutinizing pause, Linda finally relented. Fine. We have an opening as a temporary assistant in the marketing department. It's demanding, and the pay isn't great. But if you think you can handle it, you start tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. The words were a victory, but Clara couldn't ignore the coldness behind them. She had just scratched the surface, and already, her suspicions about the shift in the company's culture were being confirmed. The next morning, Clara, now fully immersed as Clara Morgan, stepped into her new role as a temporary assistant in the marketing department. Her first impression of the office was a whirlwind of chaotic energy. Phones rang incessantly, overworked employees darted between cubicles, and the tension in the air was palpable. Martha, the department's executive assistant, greeted her with an exasperated sigh and ushered her toward a small, cluttered desk tucked in the farthest corner of the office. "This will be your space," Martha said, gesturing dismissively. "Your job is simple. Assist the marketing executives with whatever they need. That includes scheduling meetings, making coffee, and running errands. Oh, and be quick about it." Clara nodded, masking her irritation. The desk, piled with papers and equipped with an ancient computer, was a stark contrast to the luxurious office she once occupied as CEO. She sat down, determined to observe and learn. It wasn't long before Clara encountered Ethan Carter, the marketing director. Ethan was tall, impeccably dressed, and had a confidence that bordered on arrogance. As he approached her desk, he looked her over with barely concealed disdain. "So, you're the new assistant," he said flatly. "Here's a stack of reports that need summarizing for the 2 p.m. meeting. And don't forget my coffee, black, no sugar, exactly 65 degrees. You'll find a thermometer in the kitchen. Don't mess it up." Clara's jaw tightened as she forced a polite smile. "Yes, Mr. Carter. I'll handle it." The day dragged on as Clara juggled impossible tasks, overheard snippets of hushed conversations about budget cuts and layoffs, and struggled with outdated office equipment. Executives treated her like an invisible cog, barely acknowledging her presence except to issue demands. But Clara's disguise allowed her to observe the true state of her company. Employees whispered about the growing disconnect between management and staff, about decisions that seemed more self-serving than strategic, and about a culture of fear that had taken root in the once thriving workplace. By the end of the day, Clara's feet ached from running errands, and her head swam with fragments of unsettling information. As she prepared to leave, Ethan Carter appeared once more, dropping a fresh stack of files onto her desk. "I need these organized by tomorrow morning," he said curtly. "If you want to survive here, you'll learn that quitting time is a suggestion, not a rule." Clara stared at the files, anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. But as she set to work, she reminded herself of her purpose: to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it might be. Little did Clara know, her quest for answers was about to lead her into a web of corruption and betrayal far more insidious than she had imagined. The shadows she was stepping into would soon reveal not only the secrets of her company, but also the hidden truths about the people she thought she could trust, and the price she would have to pay to protect her father's legacy. As the days passed, Clara, still disguised as Clara Morgan, began to settle into her new role, though the sense of unease in the office only deepened. Each interaction, every stray comment, and the carefully veiled tension among the executives added to her growing suspicion that something was deeply wrong. Her new identity allowed her to move unnoticed, a shadow in the vast machinery of the company her father had built. One evening, as Clara was filing documents in the dimly lit supply room, she overheard a hushed conversation just outside the door. The voices belonged to Ethan Carter and Linda Roberts. "We need to be more careful," Linda said, her voice sharp. "The discrepancies in the reports are starting to catch attention. If someone digs too deep, they won't," Ethan interrupted, his tone dismissive. "By the time anyone realizes, We'll have completed the sale, and it'll be too late to stop us. Clara felt her heart race. Sale? What sale? Her father had never discussed selling any part of the Morgan empire, and such a move would have been unthinkable. Pressing her ear to the door, she listened intently. Besides, Ethan continued, if anyone suspects anything, we can pin it on the lower-level staff. No one's going to believe some temp assistant or janitor over senior management. The mention of lower-level staff made Clara's blood boil. Her father had prided himself on treating every employee with dignity, and now these two were plotting to use them as scapegoats. She stayed in the supply room until their voices faded, her mind whirring with possibilities. The next day, Clara made a point to engage with Robert Wells, the janitor who had worked at Morgan Enterprises for over 3 decades. He was kind, his weathered face showing years of dedication to the company. Morning, Mr. Wells, Clara greeted him as he emptied the trash near her desk. Robert looked surprised. Most people don't bother learning my name, miss. Well, I'm not most people, Clara replied with a small smile. I wanted to ask, how have things been around here lately? Any changes you've noticed? Robert hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. Miss, I've seen things. Papers disappearing. People coming and going at odd hours. Good employees fired without explanation. It's not the company it used to be. What do you think is happening? Clara pressed. Robert lowered his voice further. I think someone's tearing it apart from the inside. For what purpose? I can't say, but if you're smart, you'll keep your head down and stay out of it. This place isn't safe anymore. Clara thanked him and returned to her desk, but her resolve only hardened. She wasn't here to keep her head down. She was here to uncover the truth. Clara's chance to act came sooner than she expected. One afternoon, while organizing files in Ethan Carter's office, she came across a folder tucked beneath a pile of routine reports. Inside were documents detailing massive financial transfers to offshore accounts. The sums were staggering, and the names attached to the accounts were unfamiliar. Fronts, most likely. Her pulse quickened as she discreetly photographed the documents with her phone. As she flipped through the papers, a name caught her eye. Vanguard Industries, a rival corporation that had been circling Morgan Enterprises for years. The implications were clear. Ethan and Linda were working with an outside entity to siphon funds and destabilize the company. Before Clara could delve further, she heard footsteps approaching the office. She barely had time to return the documents to their place and sit at the desk, pretending to work, when Ethan walked in. Still here, Sarah? He asked, his tone laced with suspicion. I was just finishing the filing you asked for, Mr. Carter, Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. Ethan narrowed his eyes but said nothing, eventually leaving the room. Clara exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. The evidence she had found was damning, but it was only a piece of the puzzle. That evening, Clara met again with Robert in a quiet corner of the building. Taking a deep breath, she decided to take a risk. Mr. Wells, she began, I'm not who you think I am. Robert looked at her curiously. What do you mean? I'm Clara Morgan, she confessed, lowering her voice. I'm here undercover to figure out what's happening to my father's company, and I need your help. Robert's eyes widened, but after a moment, he nodded. I knew there was something different about you. You've got his eyes, you know. Your father would be proud. Clara smiled faintly. Thank you, but I need to know everything you've seen. Names, dates, anything that can help me piece this together. For the next hour, Robert shared everything he knew. Strange shipments arriving after hours, employees being pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements, and whispers of a high-level betrayal involving members of the board. Clara listened intently, feeling the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on her. As she left the building that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The faint shadow of a figure lingered in her peripheral vision before disappearing into the darkness. Clara's findings pointed to one conclusion. The corruption in Morgan Enterprises wasn't just a rogue act of greed. It was part of a larger plan. The question now was how far the rot extended and whether Clara could stop it before it consumed everything her father had worked so hard to build. Unbeknownst to her, the forces conspiring against her had already begun to take notice. Clara's investigation had set a series of events into motion, and the cost of her pursuit of truth would soon become painfully clear. Clara Morgan's growing investigation began to uncover cracks in the seemingly impenetrable facade of her father's company. While her disguise as Sarah allowed her to move unnoticed, it was becoming clear that she could not do this alone. The scale of corruption was too vast, and her own resources too limited. The more she uncovered, the more vulnerable she felt. One morning, while preparing coffee in the break room, Clara noticed Sophia Blake, another assistant, watching her intently. Sophia had always seemed distant, her guarded demeanor making her an enigma. This time, however, she approached Clara, her expression unreadable. "You're different," Sophia said quietly, leaning against the counter. Clara stiffened, but kept her composure. "Different? What do you mean?" Sophia hesitated before lowering her voice. "For someone new, you ask too many questions. You're not who you say you are you?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. Was her cover blown? She carefully chose her next words. "I'm just trying to understand the company better." Sophia's eyes narrowed, but then she smiled faintly. "Relax. I'm not here to out you. Let's just say I know what it's like to wear a mask." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, intrigued. Sophia glanced around to ensure no one else was listening. "My real name is Andrea Vega. I'm a private investigator working for a group of minority shareholders who are worried about the direction this company is headed." Clara blinked in surprise. "A private investigator? Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen you," Andrea said. "The way you're piecing things together. You're not just some temp secretary, and if we're chasing the same target, we're better off working together." Clara hesitated, weighing her options. Andrea could be an invaluable ally, or a dangerous liability, but the look in her eyes convinced Clara she was sincere. "You're right. I'm not Sarah Morgan. I'm Clara Morgan, and I'm here to save my father's company." Andrea's eyes widened slightly, then she nodded. "I suspected as much. All right, Clara, let's pool our resources. I've uncovered evidence of offshore accounts and backdoor deals, but I need more to connect the dots. And you?" "I have proof of financial transfers to Vanguard Industries and a growing list of employees being silenced or dismissed," Clara replied. "But I think this conspiracy runs deeper than we imagined." Andrea's expression turned grim. "Then we have to move quickly. If they find out what we're doing, they won't hesitate to eliminate us, one way or another." With Andrea's help, Clara's investigation accelerated. Andrea had access to surveillance equipment and connections that allowed them to dig deeper into the activities of Ethan Carter and Linda Roberts. Late at night, they reviewed documents, emails, and footage, each piece of evidence painting a clearer picture of a scheme to destabilize Morgan Enterprises for a hostile takeover. The true scope of the betrayal, however, came to light one evening when Clara stumbled upon a locked drawer in Ethan Carter's office. Using a paperclip Andrea had taught her to fashion into a makeshift lockpick, she managed to pry it open. Inside, she found a dossier labeled Project Eclipse. Clara's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. The dossier detailed plans for a complete dismantling of Morgan Enterprises, asset stripping, layoffs, and strategic sales to Vanguard Industries. The goal was not just to devalue the company, but to destroy it entirely. At the bottom of the file, a name caught her eye: Victor Langford. Clara recognized him as the CEO of Vanguard Industries and her father's longtime rival. What chilled her to the bone, however, was the mention of a meeting that had taken place a month before her father's death, with her father's signature on the attendee list. She couldn't believe it. Her father had known about this plan? Had he been complicit? The thought was unbearable. Clara's mind raced as she struggled to reconcile the man she knew, principled, ethical, with the implications of these documents. Andrea, who had been keeping watch, entered the office and saw Clara's pale face. "What is it?" Clara handed her the dossier, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father's name, it's in there. He met with them." Andrea's expression hardened as she scanned the file. There's no way Daniel Morgan was part of this. If he met with them, it was for a reason. We need to figure out what that reason was. Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps sent them scrambling. Andrea grabbed the dossier, and they hid behind a cabinet as Ethan and Victor Langford entered the office. "You're sure the board is on our side?" Victor asked, his tone cold and calculating. "Most of them," Ethan replied. "Linda's been keeping the dissenters in check. By the time Clara Morgan figures out what's happening, this company will be ours." Victor let out a low chuckle. Clara Morgan is a non-issue. She's just a pampered heiress with no clue how the real world works. By the time she catches on, it'll be too late. Clara clenched her fists, anger surging through her veins. She had heard enough. After the men left, Clara and Andrea emerged from their hiding spot. Andrea placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "You're not the woman they think you are. You're stronger than that, and we're going to prove them wrong." Clara nodded, her determination hardening into resolve. "They've underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Their second will be underestimating what I'm willing to do to protect my father's legacy." Clara and Andrea worked late into the night, formulating a plan to expose the conspiracy at the next board meeting. But the stakes had grown higher. Clara knew she wasn't just fighting for her company, she was fighting for her father's name, for the employees who depended on Morgan Enterprises, and for the principles that had guided her family for generations. What Clara didn't know was that her actions had already drawn attention from dangerous forces. As she and Andrea pieced together their evidence, shadowy figures began moving in the background, preparing to strike before she could bring the truth to light. The battle for Morgan Enterprises was just beginning, and the cost of victory would be higher than Clara could have ever imagined. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Clara Morgan, still disguised as Sarah, felt the weight of her mission bearing down on her. Every detail of her plan had been scrutinized, rehearsed, and fine-tuned with Andrea's help. If they succeeded, they would unmask a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything her father had built. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for Morgan Enterprises but for Clara herself. Clara arrived early to the office, her heart pounding as she moved through the halls. Executives walked past her with hurried steps, their faces tense and wary. The air was thick with an almost tangible unease. Something was happening today, and Clara knew she had to act before it was too late. In the boardroom, the most powerful figures in the company began to gather. Ethan Carter, Linda Roberts, and a handful of other complicit board members exchanged knowing glances and murmured in low voices. Clara, positioned just outside the room with Andrea, took a deep breath. "This is it," Andrea whispered. "Are you ready?" Clara nodded, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Let's end this." With a deliberate motion, Clara removed the wig and contact lenses that had been part of her disguise for weeks, revealing her true self. Her dark brown hair fell around her shoulders, and her piercing blue eyes, so much like her father's, sparked with determination. Andrea handed her a USB drive containing the evidence they had painstakingly gathered. Without hesitation, Clara flung the doors of the boardroom open, interrupting the meeting in progress. The room fell silent as every pair of eyes turned toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara began, her voice ringing with authority, "I apologize for the interruption, but there are matters far more urgent than today's agenda. My name is Clara Morgan, and I'm here to address the betrayal that has taken root within this company." Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan's confident demeanor faltered as he quickly exchanged a panicked glance with Linda. Linda was the first to recover. "Clara, dear," she said with forced sweetness, "I think you might be mistaken. Perhaps we can discuss this privately." "I don't think so," Clara interrupted, her tone cold. "This is a conversation everyone in this room needs to hear." Andrea stepped forward, connecting her device to the room's projector. Within seconds, financial documents, email exchanges, and records of offshore transactions appeared on the screen. The evidence was damning, a web of deceit that implicated Ethan, Linda, and several others in a scheme to dismantle Morgan Enterprises for personal gain. "As you can see," Clara continued, "certain individuals have been diverting company funds, manipulating reports, and planning to sell off our assets to Vanguard Industries in a hostile takeover. This isn't just a betrayal of Morgan Enterprises. It's a betrayal of every employee who has ever trusted this company to provide for their families." The room erupted into chaos. Some board members expressed shock and outrage, while others, those clearly complicit, sat in tense silence. Ethan, His composure shattered, attempted a desperate defense. This is absurd. These accusations are baseless, fabricated. Andrea stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Carter. You've been caught, and now it's time to face the consequences. At that moment, the door opened again, and 2 police officers entered, accompanied by Robert Wells. I'm afraid you won't be leaving this meeting, Mr. Carter, one officer said. We have warrants for the arrest of everyone involved in this scheme. Ethan and Linda were handcuffed and escorted out, their protests drowned out by the murmurs of the stunned board members. Clara, standing tall amidst the chaos, felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The immediate threat to Morgan Enterprises had been neutralized, but Clara knew the battle was far from over. The arrests of Ethan and Linda were only the beginning. The fallout from their betrayal would ripple through the company for months, perhaps years. Later that evening, Clara sat in her father's study, surrounded by the artifacts of his life's work. The desk was cluttered with old photographs, business journals, and mementos from the empire he had built. Yet amidst the sense of accomplishment, Clara felt a gnawing unease. Andrea entered the room, holding a folder. "You should see this," she said, her tone grave. Clara opened the folder and was greeted with a fresh set of documents, ones Andrea had uncovered in the final moments of their investigation. They painted an even darker picture, a network of corruption that extended far beyond Morgan Enterprises, implicating politicians, rival corporations, and even international entities. "It's bigger than we thought," Andrea said, her voice heavy with concern. "Your father was fighting something massive. These plans, they weren't just about destroying Morgan Enterprises. They were about controlling entire industries, energy, transportation, even media." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "And my father?" Andrea hesitated. "There's evidence that he discovered this network years ago and tried to dismantle it from within. But that meeting with Victor Langford, what about it?" Clara pressed. Andrea met her gaze. "I think he was set up. That meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a trap. They eliminated him before he could expose them." Clara's breath caught. Her father's death wasn't an accident. It was an execution. Tears welled in her eyes, but Clara refused to let them fall. Instead, she clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "They think they've won. They think they can destroy my family's legacy and get away with it. But they're wrong." Andrea placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We have what we need to take the next step. It won't be easy, but if we act quickly, we can stop them before they move to the next phase." Clara nodded, her determination renewed. "Then we fight. For my father, for this company, and for everyone they've hurt. We won't let them win." As the night stretched on, Clara and Andrea worked tirelessly to prepare their next move. The victory in the boardroom had been significant, but it was only a small battle in a much larger war. The forces they were up against were powerful and ruthless, and the fight ahead would test Clara in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But she knew one thing for certain. She would not stop until the truth was revealed and justice was served. Clara Morgan's resolve was unshakable. The victory at the boardroom meeting had exposed some of the corruption within Morgan Enterprises, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. The deeper conspiracy, stretching far beyond her company, was a monster yet to be tamed. To dismantle it, Clara knew she had to face her most dangerous adversaries directly. Andrea, Clara, and Robert Wells, her most trusted allies, spent the next few days analyzing the evidence they had gathered. The documents pointed to a network of influential figures across corporations, politics, and even law enforcement, all tied to Vanguard Industries and its CEO, Victor Langford. "We need to strike where it hurts," Andrea said one evening as they pored over a web of connections laid out on a whiteboard. "The offshore accounts, the shell companies, they're the lifeblood of this operation. If we can freeze those assets and make the connections public, we'll bring them to their knees. But to do that," Robert interjected, "we'll need access to Vanguard's internal servers. And that's not something we can hack from here." Andrea nodded grimly. "It's true. We'll need someone on the inside, or we'll have to go in ourselves." Clara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "Then we go in," she said firmly. Victor Langford is hosting a gala in 2 days to celebrate Vanguard's latest acquisition. If we can get access to his office during the event, we can download everything we need." Andrea looked at her, surprised. "That's bold, Clara. You'd be walking into the lion's den." Clara's expression hardened. "It's the only way." The night of the gala arrived, and Clara prepared meticulously for her role. Gone was the modest secretary. In her place stood a commanding figure dressed in a sleek black gown that radiated confidence and power. Andrea posed as her assistant, and Robert, disguised as a member of the catering staff, was their inside man. The Vanguard headquarters, transformed into a lavish venue for the evening, was teeming with influential guests. Clara entered the grand ballroom with her head held high, her sharp eyes scanning the room for Victor Langford. It didn't take long to spot him, surrounded by sycophants and exuding an air of triumph. As Victor noticed her, his expression briefly flickered with recognition before he composed himself. "Miss Morgan," he said smoothly, approaching her. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." Clara offered a disarming smile. "I thought it was time I met the man everyone's been talking about." "Congratulations on your recent success, Mr. Langford." Victor chuckled. "Thank you. Though I must admit, your presence here intrigues me. I hope you're not here to discuss business." "Not at all," Clara replied, maintaining her composure. "Tonight, I'm just here to celebrate." Victor seemed satisfied with her response, but Clara's mind was already on the task at hand. As she engaged him in light conversation, Andrea discreetly slipped away to execute the next phase of their plan. Andrea made her way to the upper floors of the building, where Victor's office was located. Using a forged access card, she bypassed the first layer of security. Robert, stationed near the security room, ensured that the cameras on the floor were momentarily disabled. Once inside Victor's office, Andrea worked quickly. She connected a portable device to his computer, downloading financial records, emails, and other incriminating data. Her heart raced as the progress bar inched forward. Meanwhile, in the ballroom, Clara continued to distract Victor, her charm and wit keeping his attention away from Andrea's activities. She couldn't help but notice, however, that some of the guests were watching her closely, figures she suspected were part of the same network her father had fought against. Just as Andrea finished the download, the sound of footsteps outside the office made her freeze. She quickly hid behind a large cabinet as the door opened, and 2 men entered, speaking in low voices. "She's here," one of them said. "Clara Morgan. Langford's keeping her occupied downstairs." "Does he suspect she knows?" the other asked. "Not yet," the first man replied. "But we can't take any chances. If she's here to interfere, she won't leave this building alive." Andrea's blood ran cold. She waited until the men left before slipping out of the office, her pulse racing. She contacted Clara through an earpiece. "Clara, we've got a problem. They know you're here." Clara's stomach dropped, but she didn't let her fear show. "I'll keep him busy a little longer. Just get out safely." As Clara turned to excuse herself from Victor's company, he reached out and lightly touched her arm. "Leaving so soon, Miss Morgan?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "I just remembered I have another engagement," Clara said, feigning an apologetic smile. "But thank you for the lovely evening." Victor's expression darkened. "You know, Clara, your father was a remarkable man. It's a shame he didn't get to see the true potential of his company." Clara froze, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by that?" Victor smirked. "Let's just say he wasn't as invincible as he thought. And neither are you." The veiled threat hung in the air, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She turned and walked away, her mind racing. As she exited the ballroom, Andrea and Robert were waiting for her near the service entrance. "Did you get it?" Clara asked. Andrea nodded, holding up the device. "Everything. But we need to leave. Now." As they made their way to the car, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder and caught a glimpse of a figure in the shadows. "They know," she whispered to Andrea and Robert. "We're not safe." Back at Clara's apartment, the trio reviewed the data Andrea had retrieved. The evidence was damning. Detailed records of illegal transactions, communications with corrupt officials, and plans to dismantle Morgan Enterprises as part of a larger scheme to control key industries. But amidst the triumph, a new piece of information emerged, one that shook Clara to her core. In one of the emails, Victor had referenced a meeting with Daniel Morgan shortly before his death. He knew, Clara murmured, her voice trembling. My father knew about this, and they killed him for it. Andrea placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. This is our chance to finish what he started. But we'll need more than this to take them down. We need to expose them publicly, where they can't hide behind their power. Clara nodded, her determination renewed. Then we go public. No matter the cost. The fight was far from over, but Clara was ready. The shadows had tried to consume her father, and now they were coming for her. But this time, the shadows would not win. The following days were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Clara Morgan, Andrea, and Robert worked tirelessly to ensure that when the truth came to light, it would be undeniable and unstoppable. The evidence they had uncovered was powerful, but presenting it in the right way was crucial. Andrea suggested they coordinate with investigative journalists who had the reach and credibility to expose the corruption. Clara reached out to Evelyn Carter, a respected journalist known for uncovering high-profile scandals. Evelyn had been her father's confidant and ally, and Clara trusted her to handle the story with care. When Clara met Evelyn in a dimly lit cafe, she laid everything out, the documents, the emails, and the connections they had uncovered. Evelyn's expression shifted from curiosity to shock as she absorbed the enormity of the conspiracy. This is explosive, Evelyn said, her voice tinged with urgency. If we publish this, it's going to shake the very foundation of corporate America. But you need to understand, Clara, this will make you a target. I already am, Clara replied firmly. This isn't just about me. It's about the people my father fought to protect, the employees, the families, the communities that depend on Morgan Enterprises. I won't back down. The team coordinated a press conference to present the evidence. Evelyn's publication ran a teaser article the night before, creating a media frenzy. The headline read, "The Hidden Corruption Behind Vanguard Industries and the Death of Daniel Morgan." The next morning, Clara stood in front of a sea of reporters. Cameras flashed, and murmurs filled the air as she approached the podium. Dressed in a sharp black suit that exuded both power and purpose, she took a deep breath and addressed the audience. My name is Clara Morgan, and today, I am here to tell you the truth about the betrayal that has infected not only Morgan Enterprises but the very fabric of our economy. She outlined the evidence methodically, projecting key documents onto a large screen behind her. She named names, Ethan Carter, Linda Roberts, Victor Langford, and detailed the conspiracy that had led to her father's death and the near destruction of her company. I stand here today not just as the CEO of Morgan Enterprises, but as a daughter seeking justice for her father, as a leader fighting for her employees, and as a citizen demanding accountability from those who wield power without conscience, Clara declared, her voice unwavering. As she finished, the room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, and the live broadcast reached millions across the country. Clara stepped back, allowing Evelyn to address the technical details while she regrouped with Andrea and Robert backstage. We did it, Andrea said, her voice tinged with both relief and caution. But this is only the beginning. They won't go down without a fight. Clara nodded. Let them come. I'm ready. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. The story dominated headlines, sparking investigations at the highest levels of government and corporate oversight. Arrests were made, including Victor Langford, who was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and complicity in the murder of Daniel Morgan. But the fight was far from over. Clara faced relentless attacks from powerful enemies determined to discredit her. Anonymous threats poured in, and her personal security had to be tightened. Despite the danger, Clara remained steadfast, drawing strength from her father's memory and the growing support of the public. Employees at Morgan Enterprises rallied behind her, inspired by her courage and determination to rebuild the company. Clara implemented sweeping reforms, reinstating workers who had been wrongfully terminated and introducing measures to ensure transparency and ethical practices. One evening, as Clara worked late in her office, she received an unexpected visitor. Evelyn entered, carrying a thick folder. What's this? Clara asked, raising an eyebrow. Evelyn placed the folder on her desk. It's the final piece of the puzzle. My team uncovered something during our investigation. A network of offshore accounts connected to companies even larger than Vanguard. This conspiracy runs deeper than we thought. Clara opened the folder, her eyes scanning the pages. So, it's not over. Evelyn shook her head. No, but you've taken the first step. The world knows what's happening now, and that's more than anyone else has managed to do. Clara leaned back in her chair, a mixture of exhaustion and determination washing over her. Then we keep going, she said. For my father, for the people who rely on us, and for everyone who's been hurt by their greed. Months later, Morgan Enterprises stood as a symbol of resilience and integrity. Clara's leadership had transformed it into a beacon of hope in an industry long plagued by corruption. The journey had cost her dearly, her safety, her peace of mind, and even her faith in the system. But it had also forged her into a stronger, wiser leader. As she stood in her father's office one evening, looking out at the city skyline, Clara felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. The fight for justice had begun with her father, but it would end with her, and she was ready. The legacy of Morgan Enterprises would endure, not as a monument to wealth or power, but as a testament to the courage of those who dared to stand against injustice, no matter the cost.